Some people think that because we work on plays, what we are doing is playing. And I'm here today to talk about the work that goes into creating a play as a costume designer. There's a whole lot that happens, and a lot of it happens in your head because you're thinking about things, you're incubating on ideas, you're sharing those ideas. And then eventually you put a pencil in your hand and you begin to draw. But there's a lot more to it than just drawing pretty pictures. So, what is the essential function of a costume? The essential function of a costume is to help tell the story that the playwright wrote, the director is guiding the actors through, and the actors are presenting to an audience. We help the actors tell the story to an audience. And how do we do that? We establish a mood. We indicate where we are and when we are. We can say whether a character is a good guy or a bad guy. We fit into the world of the play, but we also fit the needs of that actor. I actually worked on a play, I didn't design it, but I worked on a play that was set in the 1880s where one of the actresses had to do a cartwheel down a set of stairs. So there's a whole lot more that goes into that than just the costume, but I'm here to talk about the costume. The 1880s, women wore corsets. Can we remove the corset? Well, even if we don't have a corset on, the bodice needs to look like there's a corset in there. So because of the needs of flexibility, we took the corset off, but we put flexible boning in the bodice. So the actress looked like she was wearing a corset, but the bodice could bend in any way that she needed. They wore long skirts during that time. We shortened the skirt about 5 inches shorter than what would have been historically accurate so that she had less chance of entangling her feet in the skirt. And then we also added extra fullness to the skirt. The 1880s, the skirts were smaller at the hem. You weren't expected to do a cartwheel in your skirt. So we added some extra fullness to the skirt so that when she did that cartwheel, she would have complete ability to flex her legs and be able to catch herself on the stairs. So the individual needs of that actress were taken into consideration before a picture was ever drawn of what that costume was going to look like. It helped tell the story. We're always thinking about the elements and principles of design and how we can use them. So color, every costume is going to be blue. So that gives us the unity. Everything is blue, but we have some variety. We have light blue, we have dark blue, we have sort of a more teal blue in there. Those kinds of, so how do we balance between the element and the principle? What are we using in those to create these costumes? Line. When we talk about line in costume, we're really talking about the silhouette. The silhouette or the line of a costume is expressing the exterior edges. If you just saw, when we think of a silhouette can be a figure that you see in shadow. So think of, you have a screen, you have someone standing behind the screen, you have a light shining behind them. We see their silhouette, we see their outside edges, and we can tell something about the clothing that they're wearing by what their outside edges are. So when we talk about silhouette or the line of a costume, that's what we're looking at. And the line or silhouette will almost always tell us our time period. All right, so what is our process? We start with our analysis. We've taken classes in analysis. We've taken classes in psychology. We've taken classes in acting. We've taken classes in directing. because that helps you as a designer to not only understand how actors are thinking, but how you can think about a character. To not only how is a director thinking, but also how can you communicate those ideas to a director? When a director uses specific language with you, what does that mean? We do research. We have to do visual research. What did that time period look like? And how are we going to use that to help us tell the story? What colors were popular in that time period? What fabrics were popular in that time period? Collaborating with other people. How are we interpreting the play? Are we setting the play in the 1840s? Are we setting the play in the 1540s? What's going on here? I've chosen this picture specifically because this was a production of Midsummer Night's Dream, where the director wanted, when they're in the city, it's very controlled. And then historically, what's a time period that was very controlled? And there were a lot of rules. And he went with the Italian Renaissance, because in the Italian Renaissance, right at the early part, when they discovered perspective and they gave it science and they gave it lines to follow, and everything had a rule. Proportion had a rule to it. Perspective has a rule to it. And so we used art of that time period to reflect the overall design of the play. You'll notice if you look closely at that picture, it looks almost like a very strict spider web in the background. The set designer went so far to not only to paint enforced perspective on the floor, but then to use little pieces of 1x painted black to show the perspective lines physically on the set. So it wasn't just something that was behind the painting, but it was actually a physical element on the set. Now, perspective, does that really affect the costumes? No, but that time period and what did the working class wear in that time period? And then the painting that we chose, you'll notice, you'll see the color of the set and the color of the costumes are all within one color palette. We chose a very specific, very tight color palette to show that these people were of this world. So these are the mechanicals who are putting on their play about Pyramus and Thisbe. But you can see they are of the world. They are the colors that the set is. And so that's unity. We used a unity of color, a unity of time period to show something about our play. Now, of course, the audience impact. This play was specifically to entertain. We didn't think we were going to be educating anybody about the Italian Renaissance and the rules of art and perspective, but we used those to entertain. There are practical considerations that we have to make. Do we have the time to build all of these costumes? Do we have the budget to not only buy the fabric, but to pay the people who are going to be making those costumes? Do we have the facilities? We have one sewing machine or we have 10 sewing machines. If we have one sewing machine, we can't have 10 stitchers working simultaneously. If we have 10 sewing machines, we could have 2 stitchers or we could have 10 stitchers. So you're constantly thinking, how will we get this done? I have this great idea, but can it be done in the time that we have to do it, with the budget that we have to do it, and with the personnel that we have to do it? That is the triangle of can we achieve it? And of course, we are constantly coordinating with scenic design and lighting design for the visuals, but then you also have to think about if coordinating with sound design, if microphones are involved, because you have to coordinate in Mic packs, you have to adjust the fitting of the costume to include a mic pack. I've also had to include flying harnesses inside costumes. So the actual technical needs of the play have to be thought about when you're fitting the costume so that the waistband isn't too tight. It can't go over the mic pack. That you have a place for the mic to run up through the costume. You have to be thinking about that in collaboration with the other people working on the show. So you're interpreting both the play and the production concept. And remember, concept is a scary word, but it just means the idea. So in that production of Midsummer, we had this idea, and that was our concept, right? So when we're working with both the play and the concept, we need to understand certain things. What's the most important moment of the play? That takes us back to our play analysis class. We need to understand who needs to be in focus. In this image right here, there's a unity of color, there's a unity of texture, but that white that has no stripes or anything on it breaks that unity. It gives us some variety, but it also gives us a focal point because it is different. Think about it. If you're doing a production of, say, any Shakespeare tragedy, we'll go with King Lear, and the set is this castle, and the castle is made out of foam that you've sprinkled to look like rough stone, right? And you've covered it with cheesecloth and you've painted it, and the set looks like rough stone. And everybody in the cast walks on stage and they're wearing these beautiful silks and satins in bright jewel tones, in reds and golds and emerald greens. You will get a certain unity. Rich people belong in a castle, but you also get this sort of variety and this distinctiveness of, oh, we need to look at the bright colored things, not the dark things. But what happens if you take that same set and your actors come in dull colors, in rough textured fabric? It can still be silk, but it might be a raw silk that looks like a homespun. It looks like wool, but and they're in dark colors. So instead of a bright, shiny red, we get a dark blood red maroon. Instead of an emerald green, we get sort of a dark forest green. We still have that variety in there, but now we have more unity of texture. And now not only are we looking at the people, but we're seeing people that belong to the space, not necessarily belong in the space, but belong to the space. So we're thinking about who these characters are. Maybe they're just the people who live there. And then suddenly in relationship or change, one of them becomes the king. And when they re-enter, they're wearing a shiny fabric. Ta-da, we've told a story visually. So we're constantly thinking, do we need to say something about the character? Do we need to say something about the story? Do we need to say something about how the characters relate to each other? Do we need to say something about how the characters relate to the story overall? You're constantly incubating on these ideas. Script influence. Okay, so in the script, you have things that characters say, you have things that characters say about themselves and things that characters say about others, and you have the things that the characters do. For example, in the play, The Little Foxes, Regina is an ugly person. She is mean and she says mean things. That's a character analysis. However, in the play, people talk about how pretty she is. They talk about she's beautiful. She's elegant. How do we say that she is a mean, ugly person when everybody on stage is saying how beautiful she is? Well, sometimes we don't need to tell the audience everything with costumes, hair, and makeup. Sometimes we need to let the audience figure that out. Let the actor play the role. So if everything in the script says that internally this person is mean and nasty and ugly, but externally they're beautiful, our job is to show them as beautiful and let the actor play the ugly. Now, yes, we can put some little hints in there. We can have a sharp edged collar. We can have the lips be a very sharp color because she says mean things. We can make the lips a focus of the design so that we know it's that she says mean things by focusing on the mouth. But unless it is specifically said that we need to symbolize everything about the character, sometimes we're just showing the audience what the people in the play see. And we have to let the actor play the part and let them surprise the audience with what happens. There are other things that we need to think about. Some plays happen in very specific worlds. There's a costume design there from the Broadway production of The Lion King. It's not realism. It is a symbolic gesture towards specific cultures and towards a specific form of storytelling. So you don't have actors out on stage in fuzzy fur costumes, right? A clown is very specific. They use shape and they also use size or mass. And these are things that you can use when you are working on a play. So say we're doing a play where the character needs to wear a floral print dress. If you're working in a giant 1,000 seat theater where the actor is going to be more than 40 feet away from most people who are looking at her, you can use a large floral print. But when you move into a small space, whether that is a small black box theater or looking at it through a camera for video or filmmaking, large flowers become funny. And if this character isn't supposed to be funny, then you need to think about the size of the flowers to keep that character as a serious character. And that's why the stripes are so big and broad and the polka dots are so big and broad on a clown. Their shoes are big. Their hats are funny because they're too small. So they use proportion to create that. Also with makeup, it's very rare that we see makeup that is stylized like this in a realistic play. Are we doing realism or are we doing one of the other isms? Are we stylizing the show so that we need to use a different type of visual to express that? And of course, on top of all of that, we're always thinking, do we have the money to achieve this? And if we don't have the money to achieve it, how are we going to solve that challenge so that we can take the next step? So the process, we have to coordinate with other people. The director has told us what their idea is. We have brought our ideas, but we have to settle on something. We are going to set this play in 1880. We are going to set this play in 1950. We are going to set this play right now. We are going to use photography. We are going to use a certain painting style. How realistic are we going to be? Color and contrast. We can have contrast in texture. We can have contrast in color. We can have contrast in pattern. What is the light to dark ratio? We don't want a woman in a navy blue dress with pink flowers sitting on a sofa that is navy blue with pink and red flowers on it. She's going to look like a floating head. No matter what lighting does, they can't save that moment. So either the sofa has to change or the dress has to change. And I'll tell you, as a costume designer, in that moment, it's easier to put a different dress on the actress than it is to reupholster a sofa. So don't plan on them changing the sofa. Plan on changing that dress if you need to. The degree of busyness and detail you could have a very plain set, and then the person who's a busybody in the show walks in and they've got a lot of print in their clothing, and they've got a lot of jewelry on, and they've got feathers in their hat that bounce when they talk, and they've got bracelets on that move when they gesture with their hands. The degree of busyness and detail is going to tell you whether that person belongs in the space or doesn't belong in the space. Are they an intruder? Do they belong with the rest of the characters? Set also dictates something about costume. And sometimes costume has to dictate. If you are wearing very large skirts, you have to have room to move in those large skirts. If we don't have room, we need to make the skirts smaller. If the door frames are not tall enough, you can't wear a hat with a large feather on it. How important to the storytelling is the hat? If the hat is the most important thing, the door frame has to be large enough. If the hat isn't the most important thing, then get rid of the hat so the actor can easily walk through the door frame. Part of the process, part of thinking about clothing as it relates to storytelling. Are you dressing the people in everyday clothes? They got out of bed this morning, they put on jeans and t-shirt. Great. So every actor shows up and we're just going to do the play with whatever the actor shows up in. They're still wearing something on stage that tells us something about that character. And whenever a director says we don't need costumes, I assume I'm going to a nudie show, because everything that's worn on stage says something about what the director thinks about what the playwright wrote. So yes, everybody can just show up in their jeans and t-shirts because this is a play about college students sitting in class. But if you want to say, well, this is the preppy kid, and this is the grunge kid, and this is the know-it-all, how do you use stereotypes to show that? Well, the preppy kid has on a polo, and the grunge kid has on a black t-shirt, and the nerd has on glasses. We've solved that problem. Very simply, one costume change, but everybody still just showed up with what they had. Maybe the person cast as the nerd has a pair of sunglasses they can pop the lenses out of, and now they've got a dark rim. So how far do you want to go into touching something about those characters? This character wears a red t-shirt, and this character wears a blue t-shirt, and this group of characters wear shades of green. Well, green and red are opposite colors, so you know there's conflict between the character in red and the characters in green. You can control that even with jeans and t-shirts. Is it important that we know that it's cold outside? If it's not important to our play, that we know it's hot or cold outside, then we don't need to deal with long sleeves and short sleeves and coats and hats and scarves. But if it's important that we know that, then we need to think about that. It is important that we know who's rich and who's poor in the show, who's a servant and who's the king. Then we can show that. If it's not important, we don't have to show that. They did, I believe it was the original production of Stephen Sondheim's Merrily We Roll Along, where all the characters wore trousers and t-shirts, and then they just had across the front of their t-shirt the name the girlfriend, the boyfriend, the friend, the producer, the director. As the actors came out on stage, their costume said, "This is who my character is." You can do that. You can do Richard III in that way, if that's the way you choose to do that, if that's your idea. So now you don't need a crown and you don't need a cape to say, you have a t-shirt that says "the king" on it. The seduction principle. How do you decide that? Different cultures see different things differently. And we've talked about how different time periods see things differently. So in some time periods, the most erotic part of the body was the elbow. In other time periods, the most erotic part of the body was the ear. During most of the 20th century, what was seen as the most erotic part of female bodies were the breasts. And so by using a different shape of underwear, specifically a bra, you can say, well, this is sexy in the 1950s. This is sexy in the 1990s. So you can say something about the seduction principle. Is somebody trying to say, look at me, I'm attractive? Or is somebody hiding that? Are they saying, don't look at me, I don't want you to see me as attractive? This is all part of thinking about how the character interacts in the play and how the actor is portraying that character. We also need to think about how many costumes there are. Does everybody wear one costume, 2 costumes, 3 costumes, 5 costumes? There may only be 8 people in the show, but if they each have 5 costumes, you have to do 40 different costumes. How complex are they? Well, they're jeans and they change their t-shirt. Think about, most of you saw Booty Candy this past semester. Think about, there were times when we had to change a whole costume, and there were times when we just changed part of a costume. That had to do with our thinking. How complex are they? How much time to build them? Those kinds of things. How much money can be spent? What is available? We also have to think about the time needs of the play. Looking at Booty Candy. Booty Candy had many different time periods. So we also had to think about how much time did they have to change their clothes. In this moment, we have less than 30 seconds. We're not going to do a full head to toe costume change. We're just going to change the shirt and the jacket. But in this one, we have a lot of time to change our clothes, so we can change from head to toe. We have intermission. Do you have double casting where an actor is playing multiple parts? Do you have double casting where you have 2 actors playing the same part on different nights? So what is the time need? Not just when, but how much time do you have to accomplish the job of changing the actors? Is it important? Is it really important in My Fair Lady that Eliza have dirt on her face? She can have dirty clothes and a dirty hat, and you do this really fast costume change to clean clothes. Did it matter if there was dirt on her face or not? In the film, she can have dirt on her face. In the play, to take the dirt off her face, you may have to put better makeup on, and you don't have time to do that. So better to go without the dirt on the face and just show the costume change. Okay, so you have to think about time when you're working with a play, because a play happens alive in time. A film isn't happening live, so you can stop the camera, you can change something, you can restart the camera. You can edit it together. How are you going to show your designs to people? Most costume designers, particularly the purists, will do research, and from their research, they will do a sketch, They will get feedback from their sketches, and then they will go to a final rendering. To render something is to do it in full color. And costume designers work with acrylics and watercolors. Watercolors were the original because it's very fast. Some work in pencil, some work in marker illustration. Most of us nowadays work in multimedia. We might do a quick watercolor wash and then finish coloring with pencil. Sometimes we might do a quick marker wash and then finish in colored pencil, because colored pencils and markers are something you can carry around and you can work whenever you have 5 minutes. Whereas watercolors, any kind of painting, acrylic, that type of thing, you need to set aside specific time and sit down and work with that. So it depends on how fast you're working and how much time you can set aside for doing those illustrations. So what does a costume designer need to do? What are their skills? What are all the different things you have to learn to be a costume designer? There's a lot of drawing. I'm not going to lie, there is drawing involved. So sketches, those kinds of things. There's what I would think of as like schoolwork, doing your research, doing your play analysis, understanding how those work. Taking a class in the history of clothing so that you understand period hairstyles and what different time period silhouettes look like. The different paperwork. So it's not just being able to create paperwork, but it's creating it in the order it needs to be created in. Understanding hats and wigs, and how does a hat work on stage? Because your lighting designer is going to have a lot to say about that. You need to be able to estimate how much fabric you need for a costume, to be able to say, I need 2 yards, so I can buy $30 a yard fabric, or I need 7 yards, so maybe I should get the $6 a yard fabric. Or planning out that budget and understanding the needs of the budget, I can get 7 yards of that $30 a yard fabric. You have to plan that out. A staffing plan. Costume designers don't always have a costume shop manager to handle all of the business of design. You might be your own company. So on top of understanding design, you have to understand the business of design and the business of construction. You have to make a plan. When am I going to go shopping? If I have to manage the costume shop and I have to go shopping, but the stores are only open at certain hours, how can I manage that? I live in rural Nacogdoches, Texas. I need to do a lot of online shopping, or I live in Manhattan and I need to walk down the street and do some shopping. You may need to know how to make a pattern and how to cut it and sew it together, how to do a fitting with an actor. There's not just the how clothes fit, but there's also the interpersonal communication, how to plan a quick change into a design and how to plan a quick change into the construction of things. Simply how to thread a sewing machine so you can sew something. I have worked with designers who can't make a pattern and who could not make a full garment, but they can sit down at a sewing machine and sew a straight seam. It's very important that you be able to do that. You might need to dye some fabric a different color. You might have to know different kinds of zippers, how to put zippers in. There are all kinds of skills. This is just what's sitting on the surface. All of these go deeper and have a lot of legs to them. So there's a lot to consider when you look at the work that a costume designer does.